It was the summer of 2017, a sticky, humid night in July. My name is Jackson Lee Carter, born and raised in Carter County, not far from Elizabethton. The Blue Hole had been my escape for years, a place where I could breathe, where the sound of the waterfalls drowned out everything. I'd spent hours hiking there, walking miles upon miles through the dense Appalachian forest. That night, I had no idea I was about to witness something that would twist my stomach into knots. I started my hike late that afternoon. Around 4:30 p.m., I took my time, climbing the rocky paths. By the time I reached my usual campsite near one of the smaller waterfalls, it was pushing 8 p.m. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and sat back against a tree, listening to the rhythmic rush of water. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. The kind of silence that wraps around you just before something terrible happens. Then, just after midnight, 12:14 a.m. to be exact, I heard it. A god-awful crash in the underbrush. Something heavy, moving fast. My heart shot up to my throat. My first thought was a bear. My second? A goddamn person. And I was right. I saw women. She came barreling out of the woods, her legs shaking beneath her. Her hair was a mess, eyes wide, wild. She was running for her life. Then I saw him. A man, face hidden behind some kind of mask, storming after her. He was yelling no, snarling words I couldn't understand, something raw and violent. My whole body locked up. I froze. My muscles turned to stone. The woman's gaze locked onto mine for half a second, helped me, before she veered off the trail, vanishing into the woods. The man followed, swinging the tire iron. His boots kicked up gravel as he ran, the sound fading into the trees. They passed me, and then silence, as if none of it had happened at all. Oh my God. Oh my God. Hell no. My body finally caught up with my brain, and I grabbed my phone, dialed 911. The operator picked up. There's a woman, there's a man, he's chasing her. He had a mask. Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh my God. The words came out broken, frantic, tangled in my own horror. They told me to stay put. Wait for the authorities. But I knew, deep in my gut, it was too late. 2 weeks later, I learned the truth. And holy hell, I wish I hadn't. The man was mentally unstable, a ticking time bomb that had finally gone off. That night, he had gone on a blood-soaked rampage. He had already killed 3 people before I saw him. That woman? She didn't make it. The cops found her body half a mile from my campsite, throat slashed, blood-soaked into the moss. The bastard took his own life after his spree, a bullet to the skull in some abandoned shack deeper in the woods. Jesus Christ. My stomach turned, bile crawling up my throat. This wasn't supposed to happen here. The Blue Hole was ours, a place for families, for hikers, for dreamers looking for solitude. Now, it was a goddamn graveyard. The town went quiet. No one hiked there at night anymore. The trails emptied, and visitors vanished. For years, that darkness clung to the Blue Hole like a damn curse. His tragic story leaves a lasting shadow over the town. For years, no one dared to hike or take late-night walks. And still, after years, the memory of that night lingers. My siblings and I had decided to take an extended hiking and camping trip, pushing ourselves to our limits in some of the most remote areas we could find. Lynville Gorge, often called the Grand Canyon of the East, seemed like the perfect place to challenge ourselves. The area was known for its rugged beauty, sheer cliffs, and deep, isolated valleys. We had read stories of lost hikers, of people disappearing without a trace, but we dismissed them as cautionary tales meant to keep the faint-hearted away. We pressed on for another 2 hours before stumbling upon the lake. It was hidden away from the main trails, an expanse of still water surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. No signs of previous campers, no footprints, no ashes from a fire. It was perfect. We set up our tents on a flat stretch of land just beyond the tree line, built a fire, and let exhaustion settle into our bones. As night fell, the wilderness around us became something else entirely. The stillness was almost unnatural. No distant chatter of hikers, no hum of insects. The stars above were clearer than I'd ever seen, their reflection on the water's surface like a second sky. Around midnight, after my siblings had gone to their tents, I decided to take a swim. The lake was eerily silent as I stepped into its freezing waters, the cold biting into my skin. I waded in deeper, feeling the lake floor drop away beneath me. Floating on my back, staring up at the endless black sky, I let the exhaustion melt away. Then it happened. A grip cold, impossibly strong latched onto the back of my neck and forced me under. My mouth filled with water before I could even scream. Panic exploded in my chest. I thrashed, clawing at the unseen hands that were forcing me deeper. My lungs screamed for air. I fought harder, legs kicking, arms flailing, but the pressure on my neck only tightened. My body convulsed, desperate to surface, and then release. I burst above the water, choking, coughing, my vision swimming. My screams ripped through the night as I thrashed toward the shore. But before I could reach the shallows, the hands returned. "You'll drown in it," he hissed, lunging again. This time, he slammed me forward, my face smashing against the lake's surface. My chest burned, my limbs weakened, and I felt myself slipping. Then, in that moment, I heard the gunshot noise. The man jerked, a dark bloom spreading across his shoulder. The middle sister stood on the shore, gun still raised. The oldest sister sprinted into the water, screaming, but the man didn't run. He stared at me, even as blood seeped down his arm. "You'll drown in it," he repeated, voice gravel and rot. Then he turned and walked away, slow, deliberate, vanishing into the trees. My sister rushed to my side, pulling me from the water. By the time the authorities arrived, they found him 3 miles east, slumped against a boulder, his flannels stiff with dried blood. No ID. No pack. Just a hunting knife in his boot. When they cuffed him, he didn't struggle, didn't speak, just kept those black eyes fixed on me. The man did not resist. He did not flinch, even as they forced him onto the ground, zip-tying his hands behind his back. His gaze never left me. "What the hell were you trying to do?" one of the officers barked, shoving him forward. The man didn't answer, not immediately. But then, in a voice so low it barely carried over the wind, he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. The officers dragged him away. I watched them disappear into the night, my body still trembling, my breath still uneven. Weeks later, I haven't heard a word from the authorities about what happened to him after that. But in my mind, he lingers. The strength in his grip, and, most of all, his eyes empty, unblinking, locked onto me like he knew something I didn't. I never went back to that place again. But yeah, we brought the weapon that saved us. Because in some isolated places, the wilderness isn't empty. I no longer trust the stillness. I still hike and camp, but never in isolation. It started with a school trip, one that was supposed to be about adventure and discovery. I was a sophomore, excited to spend a weekend deep in the Nantahala National Forest with my classmates. Our teacher, Mr. Wade, had planned the trip down to the last detail, 2 days of hiking, camping, and a scavenger hunt to keep us engaged. The first night at the campsite had been perfect. We set up tents near a creek, the water murmuring like a lullaby in the background. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and for the first time in a while, I felt free. No buzzing phone, just nature and the kind of silence that made you listen harder. We sat around the fire and trying to scare each other with legends about the forest. I should have known that real horror doesn't announce itself with eerie howls or flickering shadows. It comes when you least expect it, when you're laughing with friends, feeling safe. The next morning, we packed up and set out early. Our goal was to hike about 5 miles into the deeper woods, following a marked trail Mr. Wade had chosen. It wasn't supposed to be anything extreme, just enough to challenge us. We carried day packs with water, snacks, and journals for jotting down notes about the wildlife we spotted. A couple of hours in, the group spread out a bit. I wasn't lagging behind, but I wasn't exactly keeping pace with the front either. The trail was covered in fallen leaves, and the exposed route made me watch my step more than my surroundings. That's probably why I was the only one who noticed the black SUV parked just off the trail. It didn't belong there. The forest roads weren't accessible this deep without special permits, and even then, most vehicles wouldn't make it through the rough terrain. I stopped for a second, frowning at it. Something about it made my skin prickle. The windows were tinted, and the way it just sat there, like it was waiting for something or someone. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it belonged to a ranger. Maybe someone had special access. Maybe. At that moment, I pushed my thoughts aside and focused on the fact that my group was walking ahead of me. I increased my speed so I could catch up with them. The place was difficult to run through, but I kept my pace fast. But then, I saw a masked man standing on the other side of the tree. I changed my path and started running in the other direction. I had just called out to one of the boys in my group when suddenly, someone grabbed me from behind. A hand clamped over my mouth. Panic exploded in my chest. Someone yanked me backward off the trail, dragging me into the underbrush. I kicked wildly, but the grip was iron strong. Another hand gloved, black leather wrapped around my wrists, twisting them behind my back. Tape ripped, the sound sharp and terrifying in my ear. In seconds, my mouth was sealed shut, my arms bound tight. The forest spun around me as I was shoved forward, stumbling toward the SUV. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. The door yawned open. I fought, but it didn't matter. He was stronger. I was just a kid, and he was a grown man. I barely saw his face, just a hint of a beard, dark eyes, and something terrifyingly calm in the way he moved. Like he'd done this before. I was shoved inside. The door slammed. Then a sound cut through the haze of my fear, a voice. Shouting, "Mr. Wade." I twisted just in time to see him charging toward us, his face twisted in fury. Before I could even process it, he hurled a rock straight at the SUV's window. The glass shattered with a violent crack. The kidnapper flinched, startled, and that second of hesitation saved me. He cursed, threw the SUV into gear, and floored it. But he must have panicked. Instead of taking off with me inside, he yanked open the door and shoved me out. I hit the ground hard, pain bursting through my shoulder as I tumbled into the dirt. The vehicle roared away. Mr. Wade was there in an instant, tearing the tape from my mouth, checking me over, his hands shaking worse than mine. I could barely breathe, barely speak. I just stared at the disappearing SUV, my whole body numb with shock. The authorities got involved immediately. The forest rangers and local police searched the area for hours. They found tire tracks, footprints, but no sign of the SUV. I had to give a statement, describe the man, the vehicle, everything I remembered. My brain felt scrambled, like I was trying to piece together a nightmare that didn't make sense. It took 2 days before they caught him. Turns out, he was a drifter with a record attempted kidnappings in other states, but never enough evidence to lock him up for good. This time, though, he'd made a mistake. Somehow, they arrested the suspect. The police dug into his past, uncovering a string of disturbing incidents: attempted abductions, stalking reports, even a break-in that had never been linked to him before. I couldn't sleep after that. My parents tried to help, but what could they do? They weren't there. They didn't know what it felt like. It took me a few weeks to recover. This had happened to me for the first time in my life. The thought terrified me. What if Mr. Wade hadn't been there? What would have happened? Maybe I wouldn't be here today. Maybe someone else would be telling my story instead. That was the most terrifying incident of my life. There are places where things can hide, where people can disappear, where I almost disappeared. We were a group of 4 friends, exhausted from spending days cooped up working on a university project. Our brains were fried, our patience thin, and we needed a break. One of us suggested a late-night hike to clear our heads. It sounded like a terrible idea, but after enough prodding and teasing, I gave in. Behind the house where we were staying, there was a stretch of road leading to the deep woods, a 2-hour drive into the wild, untouched trails of Virginia. We piled into the car, excited, half dreading the long night ahead. By the time we reached the trailhead, it was just past 10:30 p.m. Something felt off immediately. No insects buzzing. Just dead, suffocating silence. I told my friend we needed to stop, find some spot where there were at least a few campers around. We didn't need this much isolation. This wasn't about enjoying the night anymore. It felt wrong. I told them it wasn't smart, that we should turn back, but they laughed, calling me paranoid. It's just the woods, guy. Stop freaking out. As we walked deeper, we were just talking, laughing, pushing deeper into the woods, looking for a good camping spot. The deeper we went, the more the trees seemed to close in. The dirt trail beneath us was uneven. We had hiked 2 miles in, our flashlights barely doing shit against the overwhelming blackness. And then we heard it. Heavy footsteps. Not from one direction, but surrounding us. Too slow, too purposeful. A chill shot through me as my grip on the flashlight tightened. Then, from the darkness ahead, 2 figures emerged. Masked men. Stop right there, you little shits. The voice was guttural, filled with something that made my skin crawl. One of them had a gun. We froze. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. Drop your bags. Empty your pockets. Now. The other one spoke this time, his tone sharp, impatient. We did what they said, hands shaking as we let our gear hit the ground. One of them kicked at our stuff, sifting through it like he was searching for something specific. This is fucking useless, the first one spat. He turned to his partner. No cash, no nothing. Just some goddamn snacks and phones. The second man laughed, a low, guttural voice. Should have known a bunch of stupid kids wouldn't have anything worth a damn. My breath caught in my throat. Stupid kids. That meant they had been watching us, tracking us. What do we do with them? The first man asked, shifting the gun in his grip. My whole body locked up. The second man sighed, like he was bored. Take them. They won't be found out here. My stomach dropped. My vision blurred at the edges. Take us. Take us where? I wanted to run from there, but my legs wouldn't move. One of them took a step forward, reaching toward one of my friends. That snapped something inside me. No. The first man stopped, turning to his partner. His tone shifted slightly. Not worth the trouble. The hell do you mean not worth it? The second one growled. Just leave them. Too much of a mess. His voice was lower now, more serious. For a moment, it felt like they were going to argue, but then the one with the gun clicked his tongue. Fine. Let's go. Just like that, they turned and moved back into the darkness of the woods. No lingering presence, just on. The second they were out of sight, we bolted. We ran back to the trailhead as fast as we could, barely able to breathe. That night burned itself into my skull. We should have never gone in. The whole idea was hell from the start, walking straight into the middle of darkness and isolation like complete idiots. We could have done something better, anything better. Staying home would have been smarter, safer. What if one of us had gotten into trouble? What if one of us had never made it back? That could have happened out there in the middle of nowhere. We were lucky, damn lucky. Something shifted in their minds, and they disappeared. I don't know what they were looking for, and I don't want to know. We never hiked there again.